All right, welcome everyone to our April 2018 class with segment 1. Today we're going to look at Chiron square the nodes. First of all, here is our lovely little housekeeping slide in the 3 different ways you can study evolutionary astrology with us. And just in case some of you love YouTube, we are working to get our weekly audio podcast posted on YouTube in addition to iTunes and right here on our, in addition to our website, evolutionaryastrology.net. And so, first of all, evolutionary astrology is a methodology that is based upon observation and correlation. You have to observe how any archetype is operating in any individual chart. And for us, an archetype has a spectrum of meaning. And we look at a planet and its rulership of a sign and house as one single archetype. And Leroy, you may want to mute yourself, honey. And for instance, we look at Mars ruling Aries in the first house as one archetype. Mars, Aries, first house, all same archetypical principles. Jeffrey Green always used to teach, if you learn the 12 archetypes, Aries through Pisces, which is the same as the first through the 12th house, then you will be able to blend a planet, a sign, and a house when you're grounded in those 12 archetypes. So just wanted to review that for you. Now, moving into Chiron. Chiron is not really looked at in general astrology as having any rulership of a sign or house. The most famous author who has written on Chiron is Barbara Hand Clow, and that was her book, Chiron, the Rainbow Bridge. In her research, she does believe that Chiron rules Virgo in the 6th house. So far, evolutionary astrology, we look at the inner side of Mercury, being passive polarity, being the inner, as ruler of Virgo in the 6th house. But I just put that out there because one thing that we know is evolution continues to, evolve astrology as well. Now, Chiron comes from the word kairos, which is Greek for the hand, which means that kairos and hand rule healing touch, Reiki, tarot, palmistry, any chiropractic work, any massage work. Barbara also looked at chirotic energy as being a sacred force that just comes from the hands, through the hands, that we will use with healing. Chiron, though, has been expanded to include all of the alternative healing arts. It was discovered in 1977. And as we looked at the late 70s, moving into the 80s, all of those alternative healing arts came back into popularity and gained more and more interest in the mainstream. Massage came into being. Chiropractors became normalized to the point that many times they're now included in insurance, health and wellness. There was I had another thing that flashed through and it went in and out. Okay, we'll just let that happen. But you get the point here with Chiron having, a lot to do with the whole alternative healing art movement that sprang up. Oh, I remember. I'll talk about this later as well. So its most basic principle is known as being the wounded healer. So we look at Chiron in a natal chart as to where we have wounds from this life and wounds from past lives. And one of the ways in which those wounds are healed is our ability to be able to let go of the wound. You know, how many of us tell the story of something that happened to us at some point in our life? Sometimes we cling to that story. We cling to the wound. Other times we kind of let it go, move on, don't really talk about it, maybe once in a while just in passing. And the ultimate way of letting go of our wounds, of course, is when we leave the body and transition out of it. And that was kind of Chiron in mythology, the centaur. He was the one healer of all the carousing centaurs, and he was injured in battle and couldn't heal his wound. And so he exchanged his immortality for death in order to be released from his wound. So Chiron is where we want to illuminate the wound. We want to bring them into the light. We want to bring them into consciousness in order to heal that wound. And as we do that, then eventually what we do is we turn those wounds into our gifts. We can turn them into healing talents that we can share with others because we've been there, done that. We've been through it. Now, Barbara Hand Clow also called Chiron the Rainbow Bridge because its orbit lies between Saturn and Uranus. And in EA, Saturn is the individuated consciousness, and Uranus is the individuated unconsciousness. And so Chiron bridges between the conscious and unconscious bodies within our soul. Now, the consciousness part of Chiron is that struggle to get into our body, to stay in our body, and to be able to raise consciousness with the body, which means that it heals in some way outright to the physical level. Barbara would call that Virgo. The unconscious part of Chiron is associated with shamanism and ancient wisdom, and that ability to exist beyond the body, which we could extrapolate out into the astral plane and the emotional, mental, spiritual bodies, which Barbara would associate with Pisces. And we can also include in that unconsciousness the collective unconsciousness as well as the individuated consciousness. Now, something that I just have known on an intuitive level from when I first started metaphysical studies, maybe even, before astrology, but as I taught the Chiron and Aries series over the course of this winter, I was sharing this through the archetype of Chiron. And this is a perspective that whenever we manifest an illness or something we call a disease, it always starts on an energetic level. And that energetic level is a spiritual disconnect with source energy. And that condenses down into mental distortions and mental woundedness. Source has abandoned me in some way. This then condenses down into crystallized emotions, the emotion of abandonment or betrayal, or take your pick of any quote unquote negative emotion. And if we're not working to address that, then it can condense down into what we call the physical manifestation of an illness or a disease. So spiritual, mental, emotional, physical in that order. And I just kind of condense that into the word SMEP. So if you hear Kim Marie say SMEP, that's my short way of talking about all four of those. Well, healing takes place the same way. Anytime someone has a miraculous recovery from any illness or disease, all self-healing will start with a spiritual reconnection to source in some way. We recognize we were not abandoned by Source. We just have the ultimate freedom to even create illness if we want. And so, as we have that reconnect with Source, we have some recognition of Source's unconditional love for us. And then we can recognize that it is a co-creative process with Source. This condenses down into a positive mental shift in our outlook somehow. When you feel loved, how does it make you feel mentally? How does it make you feel emotionally? It condenses down into emotional self-acceptance and self-love. And then that condenses down into the physical release of a dis-ease or illness in some way, and the body re-establishes health within itself. So, travels the same way with separation from source all the way out to the manifestation of a physical imbalance, travels the same way all the way down to the physical self-healings. And so through teaching the Chiron series, I'm like, why wouldn't Chiron work to heal the same way if this is how it exists in natural law, you know, for me, even beyond the rules of astrology? So I have started to look at this more and more within the whole Chiron archetype as well. And of course, if we have Chiron square the nodes, this process can have skip steps. We could cling to the physical wound because of all the pain and not work to be healing it with a direct connection to source in some way. Who knows? The stories of the skip steps of Chiron healing itself can be as varied as there are individuals with Chiron square the nodes. The whole point is the archetype of Chiron and its ability to heal its wounds and turn them into gifts are arrested in some way. And the story will be told through both nodes and their signs and houses, any other planets that are involved, and then, of course, looking to make an effort to do the healing would be starting with that resolution node. More on that as we get to those slides in just a little bit. But let's bring the nodes in as we do every month with this series. So the North Node and South Node are points in space where the moon's path intercepts the plane of the ecliptic. And the ecliptic is the Earth's actual path around the sun, but from our geocentric perspective, it looks as if the sun is going around the Earth. North Node ascending node, moon's path crosses above ecliptic. South Node descending node, moon's path is crossing below the ecliptic. Here is a visual for you. Here is the moon's path around Earth. Here's planet Earth in the middle. Here's the sun's apparent path around. And once a month, the moon's path will cross the ecliptic going north. This is the North Node. 2 weeks later, the moon's path intercepts the ecliptic where it goes south of it, and this is the South Node. So this is the astronomy of it as we look at that. And as you know, the nodes reverse through the zodiac. They precess as they go Pisces, Aquarius, Capricorn, etc. It takes about 18 and a half years to have a complete nodal cycle through the zodiac. Their movement backwards signifies a return to source on a solar lunar level. The nodal axis is retrograde about 90% of the time. If you're born with the nodes retrograde, you get a stronger sense of destiny earlier in life. If you're born with the nodes direct, 10% of the time, It can be later in life before you really get a sense of what it is you're here to do and your path in really connecting and returning with Source. Now, out of the 18 and a half years, the nodes spend approximately 18 months in any sign of the zodiac. Starting with the South Node, this is the soul's ego from the past. It is the accumulation of all the emotional residues from our past lives. It represents security because it's already known. It will also represent karma on all four levels: physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual. It is the point of familiarity, both positive and negative. From a positive perspective, it can be gifts because we put so much prior effort in, it comes to fruition. From a negative perspective, it can be quote unquote that Achilles heel, where we keep reliving something because we didn't quite figure it out yet. It is also a point of stagnation. Now, in EA's terminology, it is the prior mode of operations of the ego on emotional levels that allowed that prior karmic dynamic or natal Pluto to be actualized. To get a complete picture of the South Node, we will look at the number of aspects it's making to other planets, and we will look at the planetary rulers of the South Node by both sign and house, and then the aspects that those planetary rulers make as well. That'll give more detail, that'll just fill in how the ego operated in the past on emotional levels for the soul. North Node is always the leading edge development of the soul's ego in this life. It is our emotional growth and evolution moving forward. It represents insecurity because it's unknown, uncharted territory. Exception to the rule here, as we'll see, North Node will be active in past lives when a planet is square the nodes. But in general, the North Node represents Dharma responsibilities or the future. It's a sense of destiny, that magnetic pull forward. It is a point of movement versus South Node stagnation. And in the current life, it is the mode of operation on emotional levels that the ego is striving towards and utilizing to actualize the evolutionary intent of the soul or the Pluto polarity point. You will also look to the aspects that the North Node makes for more information and detail. You will also look at the planetary rulers of the North Node by sign and house, where they are individually located and any aspects they make to fill in more detail. Now, the past and the future are always in the tension of the present moment. And nowhere do we know that more directly than the South Node and North Node being in the tension of the present moment with the moon. We can look at this two different ways. We can look at it natally, where your natal South Node, North Node, and natal moon are at, to see where you're always in the tension between past and future and trying to evolve. And you can look at it by wherever the transiting nodal axis is in the sky, along with the transiting moon. The past is always trying to shape the future in the present moment. And again, this is because we have a tendency to project that past forward for security reasons. Now, here again, the retrograde motion of the nodes means that we're progressively trying to leave that past behind and actually move forward. Retrograde to throw off the past. Here is how we determine aspects to the nodal axis, all right? You always compare the nodes to the planet, whether it is Mercury, Uranus, Pluto, or Chiron. In this example, we're comparing the nodes to Uranus. So if we start with Uranus right here at 1909 Gemini, and we follow that inner circle going clockwise, reversing through the zodiac, we come to the south node making a gibbous opposition at 1936. If that south node was 1909, it'd be exact. If that south node was 18 degrees, it'd be a full phase opposition. In the same respect, if we start with Uranus and follow this outer circle all the way around, the north node is a balsamic conjunction to Uranus. It'd be exact if it reversed back to 1909. It'd be a new phase conjunction if it was 18 degrees or less, pulling away from Uranus. With time, you can get to the point that you actually just see it visually as you learn to, in your head, move those nodes clockwise through the zodiac. Sometimes it can take a little bit of practice, but you get there and you can just do it quite visually with that practice. Here's how we look with planets square the nodes. In this example, we're using Pluto, 16 degrees 0 Virgo. Again, because mean motion of the nodes 90% of the time reverses through the zodiac and houses clockwise, we go till we find the first node. And in this case, it's the north node. And this is what we are going to call the resolution node. This is the bottom line that we're going to refer to. This north node at 22 Gemini is a crescent phase square. It is an applying square to Pluto. If that north node was at 16 degrees Gemini, it'd be exact. If that node was all the way to 12 degrees, the green line, it'd be separating squares. So with the nodes, you take that cycle of phases and aspects and you literally do it backwards. You do it just the opposite because of the mean motion of the nodes. When planets are square the nodes, as we said before, it means both the north node and the south node both were active in creating karma in past lives. And whatever planetary archetype or archetypes, if you have more than one square the nodes, whatever they are, they skip back and forth between those nodes for security reasons, and they don't really integrate the archetype of that planet and move that planet forward or evolve it. That planetary archetype's development is arrested. Exception, sun square the nodes. There's karma, but the sun is not really skipped because it is the life force of the solar system. We wouldn't be here without the sun. And of course, this resolution node is the bottom line that we have to apply the planet to evolve through those skip steps. And here is just the directions on how you do that again. Now, when the resolution node is the south node, that planetary archetype must be resolved through consistent application via that south node. And this means there's going to be something from the past, all the issues from the past that'll be represented by that south node, by sign, by house, by aspect, by its rulers. You must go back and readdress and resolve something in order for that planetary archetype to move forward itself. When you do that, it then allows for the north node to then eventually create egoic movement forward itself as well. When the north node is the resolution node, It means whatever planet or planets are square the nodes must be resolved through consistent application via the north node. Then this means the future becomes the bottom line. Again, wherever that north node is by sign, house, aspects, planetary rulers, etc., that'll describe those details that the north node must consistently move towards and that planet must move towards. It's meant to go forward, not review the past. And when we do that, then the south node will be metamorphosed from the past. Okay, so there's all of the information, and I always just like to put the cycle of phases and aspects in. Of course, this example has it all going counterclockwise, because that's how we look at it in regards to comparing planets to themselves. With time, you'll learn to kind of reverse it in your mind when you're working with the nodes as well through practice. Now, determining aspects to the planets, here's some examples here. Jeffrey always used to teach that you would always compare faster moving planet to the slower moving planet, with the exception of the sun, all planets compared to the sun. As I've done decades of forecasting, I've kind of separated away from that over the last half a dozen years or so. I don't even remember. I have a tendency now to compare the inner planets to the sun, and I compare the sun to Jupiter, Saturn, Chiron, outer planets outward. So to show you example here, in the case of Mercury, Pluto, all right, we would start with Pluto right here, 1035 Leo, following this inner circle. We would move all the way around, and Mercury is a balsamic conjunction to Pluto. If we would look at Pluto and Venus, following this little outer line here, we'd start with Pluto. We go counterclockwise to Venus, and Venus is new phase to Pluto. Phasal relationship without an aspect. If we would look at the sun, and we would, again, I compare the sun to the outer planets. So in this case, looking at this example with Sun and Saturn, I would start with Saturn. I go all the way around the circle, and the sun is balsamic phase to Saturn without an aspect. Mercury is new phase to the sun, as well as Venus being new phase to the sun. So I just invite you to practice with that, play with that, and see how it works for you. You don't have to agree with this. I'm not really necessarily a rigid black and white person with all of the Sag and ninth house in my chart. So these are the slides, and so we're ready to move into chart example. Before we do, does anybody have any general or specific questions for me with the archetype of Chiron, with any of the nodal axis slides we just went through, comparing nodes to planets, comparing planets to each other? I'm going to take my famous drink of water, and if not, we'll move on.
Kim?
Yes.
I've got one for you here. This is from a student on the board, and I think it's probably worth exploring at this point in the presentation. And we've talked about this, you and I, about lot of the, I guess, synchronistic movements of the planets here lately. But the question is, do you feel there's a connection with Chiron ingressing into Aries while Saturn goes retrograde, and then soon after that, Uranus moves into Taurus? And of course, we could include Pluto going retrograde next week. And the statement is, if it's the bridge, I got a visual of the bridge moving in some way. Just curious.
I will refer you to last week's podcast. I spoke specifically to that issue last week. With all of these planetary directions being so active, Chiron can definitely be having a part in the play and the host shiftings and changes. Chiron is going to, start a brand new 51-year cycle of healing. When I did the Chiron series, I also did Chiron in Aries 2 parts, archetypes and cycles. And I was very pleased with those webinars and how they turned out. So I would also refer you to those. And I have a slide at the end where that 2-part webinar series is on sale, 30% off through Sun in Taurus, which means through Thursday. So if you want a lot more in-depth on Chiron moving into Aries, again, Chiron in Aries, archetypes and cycles. And last week's free podcast about all the planetary directions that are going on right now. And yes, Chiron, I think, initiating into Aries is going to have something to say between how we are structuring ourselves on societal basis. Saturn retrograde. Not to mention having impact with Uranus and Neptune and Pluto. And it's not just a rainbow bridge between Saturn and Uranus. You can look at it as the rainbow bridge between consciousness, unconsciousness, and include Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. I'm not, I don't speak a lot about Eris yet, other than I want to call it the spiritual warrior, bringing the feminine back. But Pluto we're all pretty familiar with here. And to have both Saturn and Pluto turning retrograde right now, it is really about shaking up old realities that are no longer sustainable. And as Saturn and Pluto do that, Chiron in Aries can have some strong impact in moving us forward. On a personal level, I'll give you example with our volunteer chart, because our volunteer chart has Chiron 0 degrees Aries active in her chart. So we all do, but she's got some specific aspects that turn into a yod for her. Now, any other questions before we move forward? Again, go look up last week's podcast at evolutionaryastrology.net and listen to that for more information and more details.
Oh, thanks for
A lot of.
thanks
Go ahead.
for answering.
Oh, no problem. Any other questions?
Nope.
Okay. A lot of activity here at the end of April. Take some deep breaths, slow down, walks in nature, meditation, try to hold your calm just as well as you can. And if you get any Aries feistiness going, then be gentle and forgiving with yourself and with others as best as you can. And if you see some old realities crumbling and you got a point to be an advocate for truth, stand up. All right. So our volunteer, I think, said she could be live on the call. So let me just see if Leroy
Yes,
can.
hello, yeah.
Hello, how are you, sweetie?
All right, thank you very much.
Good, good. I hear you very well. So thank you for being willing to show up for class for us. I'm going to rattle off a bunch of your chart and your environmental conditionings, and then we'll jump right into our interaction together, okay?
Right, thank you.
You betcha. No worries. So we have someone who has a lot of Virgo in her chart. She has 4 planets in Virgo, including Pluto, the soul, at 0.5 degrees Virgo. She also has 3 planets in the 6th house. So there is a lot of Virgo background energy that's running here. All right. The ruler of Pluto by sign is Mercury, which is retrograde in Virgo's 6th house. The ruler of Pluto by its own house is the Sun, which is in Mars with a new phase conjunction to it right here in Virgo as well. And both of these, new phase, Pluto the soul. All of these planets are more or less new phase Pluto, except Venus, Neptune start moving into crescent phase here. So just looking at Pluto 0 degrees Virgo and all these planets, new crescent phase, lots of new beginnings for this soul. Now, today's subject is Chiron square the nodes. Chiron's up here retrograde at 13.5 Aquarius in the 10th house. If we start with Chiron at 13 and go clockwise through the zodiac, through the houses, we come to the north node at 1248 Scorpio, and the nodes were retrograde at birth, okay? So it is, almost 1 degree past exact. So the north node's a first quarter square. The south node is a last quarter square. The resolution node is the north node. And to have those nodes just 1 degree beyond exact, Chiron square the nodes is quite strong. And yet, being past exact means that there is definitely potential to resolve these nodes. They're not applying squares, which would be increasing the skip steps if you weren't making an effort. Doesn't say she can't be lazy and just not make the effort here with them being separating squares, but the separating square does have a tendency to be a little bit easier for resolving than the applying squares, okay? Just think of any aspect. When it's applying, you've got the tension of it coming on. When it's separating, it's kind of, oh, I get it. Been there, done that. Okay, this is what it means. This is what I'm am learning here. Let's look at it by the fact that, as with so many of us, she's part of that Chiron Uranus opposition. I almost multiple generations is what I'm calling it, because it's showing up in multiple. There were 41 Chiron Uranus oppositions between the 1950s and 80s, so multiple generations here. Just for sake of showing you the math, Uranus is hanging out here at 9 degrees Leo in the 4th house. And if we start with Uranus and reverse through the zodiac and houses, the resolution node for Uranus is the south node. Uranus 9, nodes at 12. The nodes are applying squares to Uranus. So that's just the opposite of what it is for Chiron. And if there's not an effort made to resolve these skip steps with Uranus here, it can intensify the skip steps of what is going on in regards to Uranus and its arrested development. So, ruler of Chiron by Aquarius is over here, Uranus. Ruler of Chiron by 10th house is Saturn. hanging out over here in a waning sextile to Chiron in Sag and 8th house. We can start looking at more detailed aspects a little later on. I just kind of wanted to point out the rulers of Chiron, and especially the fact that one of those rulers is opposite it and also square the nodes with a different resolution node. Adds more to that picture. So this person was born in South Africa to parents who were English. She was raised upper class until her mother experienced some health issues, and it had an effect of just ending up changing mother's personality, kind of destroying the family. Father went through a business failure and he ended up committing suicide, and alcoholic when he did. This volunteer has had no contact with her mother who lives in the US or her sister who lives in Canada since 2007. There was some sexual abuse after her mother went through her issues. Mother took on a young lover. It was quite, I think, chaotic, dramatic for this volunteer. And as soon as she turned 18, she left home and moved back to England. She has been through 4 marriages. She was the one who ended each of the marriages. Nodes in first, seventh, just pointing out. Nodes in Taurus, Scorpio, just pointing out. Um, she does not have children. She had a fear of having children. She had a traumatic birth when she came through the birth canal with her mother. She has basically married older men and has supported them running their businesses, which were all pretty much successful. And she's currently retired, and her fourth marriage was initiated in 2013, and she has a loving relationship with his 2 adult children. This volunteer has been extremely sensitive and mystic and psychic her entire life from the time she was a very young child. When she was just reaching puberty, she actually had 2 out-of-body experiences. In one of them, she actually saw New York City burning. And when 9/11 came along, she realized that was the vision that she saw. She's been involved in astrology and reincarnation since she was a young child. She's been a vegetarian most of her life. A lot of experience or studies with a lot of metaphysics and alternative methodologies. She says she has not been comfortable in this cruel, mean world almost her entire life. And if it wasn't for salvation, it was kind of like a salvation for her early on as a child to recognize, oh, it's not the religious one chance and that's it. You get those multiple choices to evolve and grow and figure it out. Um, Having studied EA for a while, this volunteer feels that she is third individuated, first spirituated. So, volunteer is very easy for me to rattle things off. I would like to hear from you first with your perspective on what you think about your Chiron square the nodes. You are welcome to bring Uranus into the picture as well, and I'll clarify anything for anybody else listening if I just want to point out, specifics with study. But if you don't mind, volunteer, could we hear from you first with your perspectives?
Okay, then. Just starting with Chiron, certainly there is a fear of public. I can remember when I was 12, my first year at high school, and just sitting in the library and just thinking, oh my goodness, how does one learn everything, and how does one have the courage to be an adult? And then I used to lie in bed at night and I used to think, oh my goodness, I've only got 3 more years of high school and then I've got to face the world. And it frightened the hell out of me. So I just think that must be the 10th house Chiron, giving a woundedness in public career. That must be an echo from something, because I just always had that. Oh my goodness. And I don't know whether my parents emphasized that, but they had a rule that that once we're 18, all of us were on our own. They weren't going to support us any further. Now, both my parents had to leave home due to dysfunctionality, and they both ran away from home at 18 themselves, and had no further support from parents. So whether that was their own damage, then translating further. But it was this big thing, oh my goodness, when I'm 18, I'm all on my own. So that's kind of made me hesitant. The mother, obviously, you've got the 4th house with Uranus. That was very disruptive. We moved every 2 years. By the time I was 10, we'd lived in 5 countries. So it was very up and down. And again, you never get to make little friends, because as soon as you make a friend, you're moving and gone. And of course, then when you start a new school, you're the strange kid that nobody wants to come anywhere near. So by the time I was 12, I'd sort of realized it's best just to keep to my own company. And then by the time I was 14, when my mother started this relationship and all the dysfunctionality of abuse started, I then kept very much to myself, and didn't get involved with fellow high school people, because I didn't want them to know about my situation. So obviously, if you don't talk to anybody or make eye contact, you're invisible. So that's played quite a big role. But in other ways, it took me a long time to get a public voice. I tried public speaking when I was 30. I thought it would be good for my soul to brave it, and I couldn't do it. I kept not turning up for classes. And then when I turned 40, I did another public speaking course and managed to be only one of 3 of us out of a whole class to actually pass. So I broke that fear of public speaking, which took forever. Well, it felt like it. I mean, I'm 60 now, and the last 20 years I've had an ability to speak publicly, but prior to that, I would have hidden rather than speak. So the other thing with the mother, I think, is because of the Venus trine Chiron, there was a jealousy of my femininity that had to be destroyed from my sister, who won't have anything to do with me. And that is also extreme jealousy that I managed to be successful in life, considering the background. That doesn't sit well. It doesn't sit well with my other sibling, a brother who I have no contact with. There's a lot of sibling jealousy, which took me only until the last decade to realize how bad it was. And I realized that part of my growth. I have to say that I did have a reading by that astrologer Alan Oaken, gosh, about 15 years ago, and I was very concerned about, isn't it my responsibility to heal the family? You know, I've always believed in healing, and you know, don't leave misunderstandings unresolved. And he just said to me, you're not meant to be part of your family, let them go. So I did do that process, and I'm not sure whether that was the right thing, because my heart just wants to heal. But and it sort of I was sort of have a love link with them, but it's my sister came to a family wedding last year. She didn't let me know she was coming. She's never been to England in over 35 years. So it was quite a shock to find her at the wedding. It was quite cathartic last year. She didn't want to talk to me, but my husband went to speak to her, and he said she's not interested. Cold fish, just let it go. So that's something with that fourth house Uranus. It shocks to the psychic system, I think, which I periodically have had. My father disappeared, and then he suddenly turned up in England, and I got a phone call at work to say my father was here. I mean, I nearly passed out. It was it was like an electric bolt through the heart. I'll never forget that day. And I thought, what a strange thing to come all the way to England from South Africa, not even tell me, and they just phone me at work. And all he was doing was passing through the town I was living in. He wasn't exactly coming to visit me as such. Yeah, strange.
Yeah, so it sounds like a whole history of familial trauma with both of these planets square the nodes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the wounding that I'm listening to for you, with Chiron is, of course, it just started right off the bat with the parents and just the shock and traumas that you went through with both of these parents. I would say that it's actually, because you came in with Chiron square the nodes, this isn't the first time to have this type of shock and trauma in your family of origin. So this family was, whether it happened with them specifically previously, or whether they just, came through as the examples for you, it was re-imprinting of all of this shock and trauma of where you have been wounded so much with the family of origin. And the retrograde, Chiron wants to throw off the trauma. It wants to throw off the wounding. It wants to reach some type of objectivity with this family of origin. And, I would agree with Ellen Oken, and I have a tendency to say to people, and especially when we're individuating and spirituating, we want to heal karma. But we've got to do that observe to see, is the family willing to do so? Is the family able to do so? Okay. And, if they're not, sometimes we have to let it go.
Yeah.
Sometimes that healing is letting it go. Go ahead.
Now, I would say, looking at what type, I would say my family's consensus. They are very tribal, and they will do what's expected, what's society would say is proper kind of thing. And although they were individuals privately, and I would say my dad, who was a Sagittarian, was a little bit of a rebel. In his workplace, definitely. So the individuated side, but they wouldn't go outside of the tribe, as it were. And I think, because I was told when I was about 13, I was the black sheep of the family, the nuisance. And my dad used to say, you're so how independent in what you think, and you're so out of order, you'll have your comeuppance. But I just think that they just really found me an uncomfortable being because I did not conform. And I think that was something that had to be suppressed. I don't know. I've got a feeling that maybe I irritated them. And I think with my sister in particular, I throw up shadows she doesn't want to know about.
Exactly. That's a tendency. That is what has a tendency to happen for the black sheep who is typically the one more evolved, okay, you act like that mirror showing the truth back to them in some way or showing their shadow back to them. And if they don't want to look at it, it's easier to deny and project it back to you.
Absolutely. And also to be quite ruthless. I mean, I'm quite a soft person, and they're ruthless. At least
Mhm,
in my,
mhm,
I find them
mhm,
so. I just couldn't do what they do. I just couldn't.
Yeah. Well, the Chiron of, here we are seeing, the woundedness with the family of origin and all the trauma that it has, made conscious for you with Chiron. And just to show, people listening that going back and forth, the extremes of isolation and I've got to be by myself in order to be safe, and the extremes of the ruthlessness of Scorpio, the enmeshment with the wounding from mother, okay. Scorpio can, here's all the sexual wounding as well that went through. So for Chiron, it's been back and forth between those extremes of isolation until you were so lonely. You bounced back over here into the dysfunctional relating until you couldn't stand it anymore and went back over here to I'm just going to be by myself again. So you can see how the woundedness of Chiron went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. Now, resolution node for Chiron being over here in the north node, it literally means on some levels doing the Scorpio confrontation, doing the Scorpio deep, deep psychology of all of this, familial, you know, seventh house, square to the fourth and 10th, okay? All of the enmeshment and games and neediness, all the Scorpio Libra stuff that has played out. Um, it could be to the point that you confront them, literally, and it could be that you just have to have the deep psychology of recognizing who they really are and then holding your healthy boundaries with them. And it sounds like you have made effort to hold the healthy boundaries with them.
Yeah,
Um,
I had a confrontation in March 20, 15, 14. Yeah, 20, March 2015, when my mother was going to be 80. She's a Taurus, and there was to be a big family reunion, and I chose not to go, and it caused a big blow up. But I I was told I should respect the mother and pay all that money to go to New York State for a big 80th birthday that my sister was organizing from Ottawa, and I just said no, and that's really blue. And then because they, were cross with me, I then made a public statement to the family as to why I would not.
mm, good for you, girl. Good for you. And they're reiterated finding that voice, with the soul and saying no, and this is why. And yeah, it basically exposing, the truth of what was going on. And this is Chiron then evolving into standing up for itself as it moved forward through life with family.
But it's interesting because I did that. My godmother and various people associated with the family have disowned me. And you suddenly at the end of that year, no Christmas cards, no birthday cards, and yeah, so yeah, it's certainly had its fallout.
Have you had the objectivity to recognize it's easier for them to um,
Oh yes,
believe the,
disconnect because I've opened up something, and if they carry on a relationship with me, they've somehow got to be a part of it. And and if you don't want to be a part of it, and you've got enough angst of your own life, you just bail out. No, I more than understand that.
mm-hmm,
You know, from their point of view, they've got to maturity, and whatever they knew, they're taking it to their grave. It's not their problem.
mm-hmm. Yep, yep, exactly. Um, so let me, bring in the, the ruler of Chiron in the 10th house. This is father buying into some lies, okay? It could even be mother as authoritarian parent when father left the family, just also, being more willing to buy into the lie than express the truth, okay? I also want to just tell everybody coming off being a, Leo soul and all of this energy right here in Virgo in the 6th house, this could be um, suggesting, lifetimes of being conditioned into victimization by the patriarchy. And so here's all this, Jupiter in the 6th is a signature for being a healer. Mercury, Virgo 6, all the Virgo 6th house planets can be signatures for being old healer, even old shaman. And so then as the patriarchy arose, the persecutions that could have come, okay, um, as they wanted to, wipe out the shamans, wipe out the pagans, and et cetera, et cetera. And so instead of being able to just really express your creativity and your individuality, this Uranus square the nodes, the south node is going to be active from the past in addition to the north node, but you just would try to go off and be by yourself. And again, it just created such extreme loneliness that you would then come out and get involved and enmeshed, with the next person who came along. Look at how you went for older men. Look at how you did, all these marriages and allowing all this healing creative energy in various ways coming through the partner. Okay. For Uranus, it really is learning to love self deeply, recognizing part of why you were thrown in on yourself with this family origin was to really love as deeply as possible. Ruler by house is the moon up here in Capricorn, emotional suppressant early on to survive, okay? Emotional denial, and compensating with the 9th house, and emotional maturity as Uranus really made an effort to go back to the past and understood this loneliness and isolation from deeper perspectives. And for Uranus, the objectivity of turning this into self reliance is in essence of what is coming through. If you start to put these two planets together, okay, it is really honoring that ebb and flow of when to be alone in order to heal something from the past and when to socialize in order to stand up for yourself and evolve moving forward. So there will be a back and forth and a back and forth between, again, me relating to myself in healing, and then me going forth into that world and finding my courage and ability to stand up for myself and have healthy boundaries. And as you do that, then this Pluto polarity point, you know, at 0 degrees Pisces heals even further. And the 11th house Aquarius polarity point becomes more and more and more objective. It's not that you cease feeling as deeply as you do, but you become better at objectifying what's my karma and what is someone else's karma. And then being able to detach from someone else's karma, to be empathetic in the world, okay, without having to feel like you've got to take on the karma of the world in order to heal thyself. It's recognizing you've really got to heal yourself to really be truly of service to the world.
Yeah. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. I certainly know with the persecution, I learnt that quite early because when I was little, I did go to a convent, and when I was 9, I don't know where the willfulness came from, but I just decided to write the catechism exam exactly as I felt it was, and I basically said, the question was about when you're born, are you born in sin? And I said, no such thing. You're born in love and blah, blah. Anyway, I wrote my thing, and the nun was absolutely livid with me and made me stand on the table, and all the little girls had to go around me, and I was the daughter of the devil, and had to have the rosary said umpteen times every morning. And basically the nun gave the little girls permission to bash me up in the playground because, you know, I deserved to be punished. I was so evil. And that was my first experience of being persecuted in this life, but it's verbal because we don't put people to the stakes anymore. But
Mm-hmm.
and then when I was a teenager, my best friend of 5 years through high school, she wrote me a letter to say that as I did astrology, I was the daughter of the devil, and her minister and her new faith that she'd got involved in would had said that she could no longer be my friend, and which, you know, that was the end of that relationship. And then another friend wouldn't have me at her daughter's christening because I was an astrologer. So gosh, by the time I was 20, I was very aware of you know, 20th century persecution. At least thank goodness it wasn't like it used to be.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, this time it is different, as I like to say, you
Oh
know.
gosh, yes. Well, certainly for us in the West. I mean, it's still applicable in some parts of the world, but we
Yes.
are incredibly lucky. And I think for us born in the West, if we're individuated going to the spirituated, we're given this um, balm of calmness, and then sense that we can really flex our wings and our voice in enlightenment ways, without the fear of being burnt at the stake.
Mm-hmm.
And it is allowing us to heal. There's no doubt about it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And look at Chiron over here as it moves into 0 degrees Aries and creates this yod with your Pluto 0 Virgo and your Neptune 0 Scorpio. So there may be some discomfort from the inconjunct aspects, but you know, I see you finding your courage to speak your spiritual truth in some way here throughout this next year, as again, Chiron retrograde back to Pisces, it will go over that 0 to 1 degree Aries point 3 times.
Yeah, I have been asked in late June to give a talk at a conference about my experience of conflict and harmony and how to tread the spiritual path. So that's,
There you
so
go.
I will be doing that. So that will be putting me out in the public, which is something that's quite new to me.
And this Pluto can be, feeling that sense of persecution again, okay? But the Chiron, waxing in conjunct to Neptune, this is really finding again that Aries courage and being a spiritual warrior, as I'm liking to call Chiron in Aries for, the next 7 years. Where are we going to be the spiritual warriors for healing?
Yeah.
And go ahead.
I was just going to say, I always think, thank goodness I had an Aries ascendant. If I didn't have that Aries ascendant, I don't know what that very shy Virgo would have done. Gosh, it's my Aries that suddenly I just wake up one morning and I am so powerfully decisive, and I act immediately. And it's usually everybody's horrified with me because I create tremendous change, but it's always been the right thing to do. But I don't know if I'd ever do it if it wasn't for that Aries ascendant.
And the Mars new phase, the Sun.
Yeah. Oh yes,
Okay.
that gives you, yeah, that gives you courage.
That too. So I would just like to say in general for associates who are just listening with all this Virgo and all this sixth house. And of course, I've had the benefit of actually, reading your chart before, and I think you've even been volunteer in classes before. So I've been able to get, a little familiar with your background through that observe, correlate. Um, you know, Jeffrey Green was a Pluto Leo, and he excellent teachings on Leo top of the pyramid, Virgo inverted the pyramid to the bottom. However, you've got to observe and correlate, because when you have planets in the fifth house, you can't assume over egotism. Sometimes planets are in Leo or the fifth house because there is a need to have development of more ego. In the same respect, when there are a fair amount of planets in Virgo or the sixth house, you cannot make the assumption that they were bad, so they've got to be punished, atoned, and humiliated. Sometimes, especially with the Piscean age, 2,000 years, the last 6 to 8,000 years of patriarchal conditionings, sometimes the soul went overboard with atoning for stealing the loaf of bread, as I like to say, and they've gotten so caught up in the punishment of Virgo, okay, that they're drawing it to them because they're, allowing it to happen. In other words, they may not have a lot that they are guilty of and need to atone for. They got caught up in the conditioning. You are bad. You are bad. So when you're playing with that Leo Virgo, you really have to do a lot of that observe and correlate, observe and correlate. And again, it's not to say that you can't have a history where you didn't pick up the sword, but it's a lifetime or two, or a time period of a certain lifetime. But overall, in the soul's history, it doesn't broadly really describe what the soul is like. And so if you look at this chart example here with this Mars new phase, the Sun in Leo, you could easily, make an assumption, oh, this person has been a warrior and a soldier and South Node in Aries, and, they were, nasty, 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 and now tables have turned and it's coming back at them. You cannot make that assumption. That was also part of Jeffrey's teachings as well. You can't assume someone who's been raped in a past life, karma. You have to look and see whether or not it might be evolutionary necessity. The intensity of any certain experience in order to wake the soul up. And so,
Yeah,
correct me if you go ahead. Go ahead.
certainly think that, well, because I was about 13, 14, I was really into reincarnation and sort of thinking, well, why am I in this situation? What have I done? And I suppose because of my Catholic convent side, you kind of immediately go into sin and guilt, which wasn't helpful. And as you grow up, you realize, gosh, this word sin and guilt is so damaging. But certainly now I've lost my train of thought here. Sorry about that.
Were you a nasty soldier, or did you take on all the Virgo guilt conditioning?
I certainly feel that I was male in a last life, and I felt that I was too independent. That's I just always, whenever I'm in my dreams, I'm a man, and I'm authority. And I can't visualize myself as female in my when I think about myself. So that's so I've always thought, well, maybe I didn't understand family dynamics, and I needed to really be aware of the neediness of family and just humans. And when I was 7, I was really upset, and I was going around the garden calling out to God and just saying, why am I so unloved? What I don't understand. What's the matter? And I mean, goodness knows what I saw, but I had the most incredible, euphoric, blissful experience of meeting some aliens in a spaceship that landed. And I went into the spaceship, and they said to me, don't worry, you're our child, you belong to us, but you've just got to stick it out on planet Earth, and you've got to understand how humans tick. And once you understand how humans tick, you will be collected. We'll come and get you again. So you just go back out there and just endure, but don't worry, because we're out there and we're watching you. And I can remember my mother, I was in trouble for not tidying my Wendy house or something. I can remember just telling her, I don't care about you. I've got real parents, and they're watching me, and they're in outer space. So you can do whatever you like to me. And I must admit, that sort of just stayed in my head, and I thought, no, I've obviously got to learn how people are and how to function with people. And with all the planets being on the other side and almost nothing on the self side, it's all on the eastern. I just thought, oh, that's what I've got to do. I've just got to really take on board and understand humans, and not be you sink, don't you? We all do in this world. We sink and we become the victim. And I think I've got to learn to just let go of all those archetypes of the woundingness, and just observe and be at peace with myself.
Right. I think what you're picking up on your dreams is most recent past life, and it can be, here's interesting questioning as well. With these 2 planets square the nodes, and there be 10th and 4th house planets, there can be the wounding that, every time you come through as male, you get wounded, or every time you come through as female, you get wounded. There could be some of that plays in the picture as well. I was asking the question more from the whole perspective of almost your soul history. You know, not so much just the most recent past life or even this lifetime. I'm thinking because, okay, so I got several things I want to say. Anybody who feels that they've come from a different solar system or a different galaxy, okay, when they come to planet Earth, they usually don't show up here for a single lifetime. They usually tend to show up for a series of lifetimes. And sometimes they can show up for a long time to be a part of the healing on planet Earth. And due to the existence of how human incarnations work, and we tend to forget what happened in past lives. That's why we have an individuated unconsciousness. If we didn't, we'd go crazy. It takes a broad perspective to be able to hold all your past lives in consciousness. It's why that happens on the other side in non-physical body, when you can have non-physical beings help you with that perspective, okay? And so the point is, we have a tendency to have several lifetimes here. And sometimes it's from the perspective of you need to learn love. You need to learn how to be in the emotions. You need to learn that emotional body. Sometimes it's from the perspective of coming here to help planet Earth love and be in its emotional body. We can have a tendency to get caught up in all the conditionings and distortions because we have to play by planet Earth's rules when we come here. Okay, so that can easily be some of what you have just described and experienced. Just your own environmental conditionings that you shared with me. You just couldn't understand how this world could be so cruel. All that Virgo 6th house energy is wanted to be a healer, is wanted to help this planet heal. And how much of the wounding have you gotten caught up in? It, for whatever purposes, is serving to evolve your own soul. And then again,
I know what I was trying to say. I remember being so excited about astrology, healing, um, everything that I knew at 14. And I was taking a meditative walk, which I always did. And this voice just said to me, you are going to experience in the next few months a complete reversal of your life, and everything you think you are is going to be turned upside down. Things are going to happen to you, and you must not lose faith in yourself. And I can remember thinking and saying to this voice, don't worry, I absolutely on path. I'm going to be a teacher. I'm going to be an esoteric teacher whereby you give children wings. I was going to use astrology, color healing, the whole works. In South Africa, you can have your own school. I had it all planned out that I was going to be of service. No problem. And I just remember saying, don't you worry about it. I'm on target. I know exactly what I'm going to achieve and do. And this voice just said to me, no, you don't. You are not going to be able to deal with what's about to happen. And I always thought, gosh, that bit when everything did turn upside down and I completely went into this dark world, as it were, well, reality of this place, I remember thinking, gosh, maybe that had to happen because on some level I was just too idealistic, just major too idealistic. And when you're idealistic, you're not functioning from heart and empathy because you're functioning from mind. And that needed to be brought in. And the only way that the heart and the emotions and sensitivity can be brought in is through trauma.
There you go. And it was also, there was the tempering, as I like to use the Virgo word. There was the tempering of the Virgo soul fifth house Pluto and going, oh, I don't get to play God. I have to come over here and recognize the ultimate source of everything. And how am I to serve source? How and it's not always the way we think it's going to be, especially when we're individuating and spirituating. Oh, I'm just going to save the world. Okay, I've had enough of this shit. I'm just going to save the world.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that young girl of 13, 14 was just so idealistic and so sure of her convictions, and that I just turn things around, no problem. And I mean, that's a little bit on the ego level without meaning to be.
And I you're like a month and a half older than me, okay? So I have the Chiron Uranus opposition square the nodes, and my Virgo is about 2 degrees Pluto, but it's 8th, and they're all different houses and stuff. And it was the same thing when I was young. I was like, why do we have to be so mean to each other? Why can't we just figure this out? And then when I found EA and I really, got these different evolutionary states of consciousness, for whatever reasons, I said, okay, I am going to follow this consensus consciousness because they have to get it in order for us to really have peace on earth.
Oh,
And
absolutely. Yeah.
and it's why I've always been so interested in the different evolutionary states, and why I've always, been so interested. I know people, sometimes you need the break from the consensus world, and I'm not going to turn the TV on. I'm not going to follow the news, or that type of stuff. I've worked hard to objectify with my Uranus square the nodes and Chiron and Aquarius square the nodes. I've worked hard to just objectify in general. Not that Leroy thinks I'm really objective when I'm sometimes yelling at the TV set, but I've just kind of really tried to be an observer of consensus, to just see when they make baby steps of progress. That anyway, I'm sidetracking a little bit
No,
here, but
but that's exactly what I love about ENA, this evolution astrology, is purely and simply because it now makes me comfortable. Instead of I just don't understand why people don't get it. I now accept that we all have our path to tread, and we're all at different levels, and the majority will be in consensus because that is the safe part, and that's the first stage of everything. And it certainly that helped me understand my family, because I absolutely know their consensus. They just don't step out of any box.
sure.
Yeah.
Let me start checking in with um um everybody else who could be listening. Do we have any comments or questions from the board? Most of you know how to come through the Q&A or raise your hand if you want to literally speak. You're welcome to ask any questions. You're welcome to ask me to clarify anything on Chiron square the nodes. Volunteer, questions from you, comments further?
No, that's fine. No, I'm glad you pointed out the yod. I shall bear that in mind.
Oh yes, there may be some discomfort in it, but I think it's kind of that I don't want to use the word squeezing, but it's just kind of like that pressure that just really has you finding your spiritual voice in some way. And it can have you finding your voice as a healer in some way as well. So I'm excited to hear about your public talk. that's
Yeah.
coming up
Oh,
soon.
yeah. No, I know that's good for my soul, but it also, because when you get asked to do something public like that about enlightenment, it really makes you have to go deep in yourself as well, because the last thing any of us want to be that teaches these subjects is just a lot of knowledgeable words, but not actually shining it at oneself. Got to be what you're talking about.
Yes, yes, yes. Leroy, questions from anybody coming through? Comments? Out there, I pay no attention.
Can you hear me
Yes,
now? Okay.
yes.
All right, I
Yeah.
got a USB port down there that might not be working. Anyway, yes, I have a question from one of our students. I'm going to go ahead and unmic her. I've muted our volunteer for now, and I'm going to unmute Wanda to ask her question. And just to preface the question, here we have a Chiron square the nodes, but it's also retrograde. So it's about retrogrades, and I'll go ahead and
Sure.
unmute Wanda.
Sure.
Wanda, are you there?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now, sweetie. Hello.
Hi. What I wanted to know is, does the retrograde, especially when you've got a planet square the nodes and it is retrograde, how does it intensify it, or what is the additional? To me, it seems like there's an additional, step there that has to be done since this planet is also retrograde. And
Sure. Go ahead.
there's a second part, or maybe a second question to that. Say, does that affect also, is that there if the planet is that square the nodes is not retrograde, but the ruler of that planet is retrograde?
Okay, gotcha. I made a little note here, so hopefully I can answer all this for you. First of all, good question. I don't think I've put this into the notes or into our PowerPoint slides yet, but when you have a planet that's square the nodes and it is retrograde, it is going to intensify the need for that planet to evolve the skip steps. First of all, just that planet retrograde, and again, I include Chiron as a planet for simplification of language. When you have Chiron retrograde, or a planet retrograde, that planet is trying to liberate itself. It's trying to throw off conditioning factors and return to its own individualized natural law. And if you add on to that, then the planet being square the nodes, you've got the intensity of the retrograde to break free. And then you've got the intensity of the skip steps to resolve that planetary archetype and help it leap forward on an evolutionary perspective. And let's say Chiron was not retrograde in this example. However, one of the rulers of Chiron would be retrograde. It could have the same effect. Okay. That planetary ruler retrograde would be wanting to break free and liberate in its own way. And that would have a symbiotic effect on the planet square the nodes as its ruler. All right, clear? Good question. Thank you very much, honey, for that question. I appreciate that. I've not really addressed that for anybody yet. So specifically in regards to this chart, then you can really see how, this person has so wanted to break free from her wounds and really be able to take charge of her life, 10th house, and even turn all of those, wounds and wounding into something she could really, be of service and help with on planet Earth as well. Okay. Other questions then as we're looking at this chart? I'm trying to look at my own chart. I don't think I have my chart handy at the moment. I know I have Uranus. I think I have Uranus. No, I wasn't born with any retrograde planets, but I can't remember Chiron. And then I'll tell you, like in my example, I wasn't born with Uranus retrograde, square the nodes, but Uranus went retrograde by progression. Oh gosh, maybe 10 years ago or so. But if you have a, planet square the nodes, you would want to check, because if it does then at some point go retrograde by progression, that can, create that same effect at some point later on in life. And if the retrograde, if the planet square the nodes is retrograde natally and goes direct by progression, that will then mean that archetype has been throwing off the past to the degree it can this lifetime. And it's now meant to integrate that individualization of whatever that planetary archetype is. It would still continue throwing off the skip steps for an entire lifetime, because that planet square the nodes natally will be in effect for an entire lifetime. Okay, hopefully that was clear for you. Further questions, comments? I know Leroy muted you, volunteer. You're welcome to make yourself live again, or request to be live if you have more comments. Anything else, Leroy? Comments, questions, and from anybody?
Nope.
Let's bring our volunteer back on live, because I want to make sure that I give her a chance to have any final thoughts or comments. I don't want to be a butt at it.
No, I can't think of anything more to really add to that, other than certainly my sort of overall message that I got from that 9/11 experience, when I was shown New York on fire and all these people moving across deserts and lack of water and food and just chaos, that I understood my vision, that when that happened, and I was to look out for it when it happened, that the world needs enlightenment. That the so, because I was so into astrology and everything, I'm very aware that taking herbs or healing and reflexology and all the things I knew were so taboo. Certainly in the 60s, early 70s, when I was young, that I knew that that's when all this holistic stuff that I was just getting into would be desperately needed to reverse the chaos after this this fire in New York. It's interesting, because it's very much what's needed. We need to hold the space.
Yes, yes. And just in case we have anybody who's wondering, when you have planets in Aquarius or you have planets in the 11th house, remember that Uranus Aquarius 11th house, that brings us that blueprint of the future, you can have visions. And because Uranus, Aquarius, 11th house is the individuated unconsciousness containing past in all its detail, what we suppress via the present and the blueprints of the future, and it can come up very disjointed. Many times the Aquarius 11th house visions, they don't come with a date time stamp. They get the vision, but they don't necessarily know when it will come about.
The only thing I would say, I did ask, and I was told I'd be in my 40s. I did know that, and this voice said to me, make sure you get married, you have your pretty dresses, that you have all the lovely things, because when this event happens, it's no time to be playing around with planning holidays and extensions to your house. It's time for work and to help the earth heal.
And that can be part of your...
I did know it was going to be in my 40s.
Sure. That can be your Neptune 0 degrees Scorpio, but also your Neptune in the 11th house. You know, the fact that you could converse 7th house Neptune with non-physical beings. Not always, you can't make that assumption with Aquarius 11th house energy. You know, sometimes it can be there just with Aquarius in 11th house, okay? But you can't make that assumption. And I'm seeing more this Neptune in the 7th, that you've literally had your telepathic conversations. Neptune ruling telepathy.
Yeah, yes, and because I was young and so idealistic, I mean, I just assumed it was God talking to me. I never even thought otherwise. I mean, now I don't know whether it's higher self, this, that, or the other, but I shall leave that nebulous. But at the time, of course, I as I said, I was very idealistic and authoritative, and I just assumed it was him, and I just happily asked questions, and it was very clear. And I knew. And the weird thing was, on the 11th of August, a month before it happened, I met my sister-in-law in South Africa who was dying, and she came to England in order to specifically meet me and say farewell. And she just out the blue at Heathrow Airport, as she was about to get her flight, just said, oh, by the way, what do you know about the future? And I, out the blue, just told her about all this. I said, now I know I'm now in my 40s. I'm watching New York like a hawk, because I know it's got to be happening. I didn't know what was. And it was just staggering to find exactly a month later, on the 11th of September, it happened. Really curious that she should almost like be a messenger, reminder, or echo.
Yep. Well, as we know, Source speaks to us in many, many different ways through many different voices, including inside our own head.
Yeah.
Well, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you very much for volunteering. Let me check in one more time. Comments or questions from anybody with our subject matter today, the chart today?
No, just several appreciations coming from the board for our volunteer and her story. So thank you.
Oh, most definitely volunteer. And I wish you all the best taking charge of your life in the many ways you're turning your talents into your gifts that you share, however it feels appropriate in the world to do so.
Oh, thank you very much.
And I'll continue to see you on Facebook loving our four-leggeds, okay?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, thank you. I adore your little Rocky. Absolutely adore him.
Oh, thank you. Well, thank you, volunteer. Thank you, everyone. There's just a couple more slides really quickly. We have 3 more series to go through. I do have a volunteer who has a very wide Pluto square the nodes that we can use. And I may have someone on Uranus, but I'm just kind of putting it out there. If anybody wants to show up, you're more than welcome to do so. I went through and reviewed all of my old audio classes with Leroy a little bit ago, and I may move into planetary pairs this fall. I may add on some other classes that are not popping into my head right now, Mercury Direct, but Leroy and I looked back through my dozen years of audio classes, and I went, oh dear, I can keep teaching for a while. So I'm not going anywhere with the monthly classes, everyone, but I will take August, or maybe August and September. I will take a little bit of a break because I, this fall, will be 15 years teaching these monthly classes. And out of 15 years, I've maybe missed 6, 7 months. So I might be just a little more gentle with myself in the summertime. Roy's going, yahoo! I do have a Mars retrograde that's going to come up in June. We're going to have another free Mercury retrograde in Leo. Didn't we just get done? Oh, remember, if you didn't see my Mercury in Aries, Mercury is in fire signs 6.5 months of 2018. Half the year, Mercury is in the 3 fire signs. So excited communications in general all year long if you haven't seen any of that yet. Again, until Thursday, the Chiron is 30% off. You just put in the coupon code Chiron at checkout. The houses are available in, the 6 individual classes if you want to just pertain to your particular one. Tomorrow, I finish up with Uranus and Taurus through the 11th and 12th houses. And in case anybody is wondering, since December, I have taught 64 hours of webinars. Kimmy is ready for a little bit of a break. However, thank you to all of you who enjoy studying with Leroy, and I appreciate you all very much. And I will see you next month for Uranus Square the Nodes.